For months, police watched silently as tensions rose, alliances shifted, and old boundaries were tested. Then, in a matter of hours, doors were forced open, patches were seized, and a message was delivered with surgical precision. 12 members and associates of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club now face charges not for violence, but for defying a legal net designed to choke criminal networks before blood is spilled. This is the story of Strikeforce Benson and how police moved first. What led to the creation of Strikeforce Benson?
Crime Command's Raptor squad in response to a sharp rise in tensions between the Hells Angels and the Gladiators Motorcycle Club. The conflict reportedly intensified after an alleged
Law enforcement agencies rarely form dedicated strike forces without clear and sustained evidence that conventional policing responses are no longer sufficient. This was precisely the case with Strikeforce Benson, which was established by the NSW Police Force's Raptor squad in August 2025. Amid growing concerns about escalating tensions between outlaw motorcycle clubs, most notably the Hells Angels and the Gladiators in the Hunter region of New South Wales, Strikeforce Benson was not conceived in isolation. Rather, it emerged against a backdrop of intensifying conflict and a pattern of incidents that placed public safety at risk. For months leading up to its formation, police intelligence units had been observing an increase in the frequency, size, and coordination of Hells Angels gatherings both within and outside of the Hunter region. Vehicles registered outside the region were converging on local clubhouses. Meetings were being arranged with minimal notice, and members of rival clubs were reportedly being pressured into confrontations beyond the usual posturing, often seen in outlaw motorcycle club rivalries. These developments suggested a breakdown in the long-standing informal arrangements that had kept tensions in check. In previous years, rival clubs such as the Comancheros, Rebels, Finks, and Hells Angels had been engaged in a complex tapestry of alliances and rivalries that, while volatile, rarely spiraled into overt public conflict, in part because police consorting laws and intelligence operations had acted to suppress overt coordination among high-risk individuals. By mid-2025, however, police began to detect behavior that raised alarm bells. Intelligence indicated that Hells Angels members were not only gathering in greater numbers, but were also adopting more assertive postures toward rival clubs, including pushing for influence over established clubhouses. These associations were occurring at times and places that did not align with legitimate club activities, but instead appeared designed to assert control over territory and social influence. The tipping point came on 23 July 2025, when reports emerged that dozens of Hells Angels members had converged on the long-established clubhouse of the Gladiators Motorcycle Club in Maitland, a regional town in the Hunter area. Witness accounts and local reporting described a tense confrontation in which visiting members allegedly issued ultimatums to local gladiators, demanding they either submit to patch over, formally joining the Hells Angels, or vacate their own clubhouse entirely. Such an act, if accurately reported, represented a significant departure from standard outlaw motorcycle club interactions and was interpreted by police as an attempt at forcible territory consolidation rather than social engagement. Rather than a symbolic presence, intelligence suggested this gathering was intended to assert dominance and force compliance, marking a departure from what police considered normal inter-club activity. Police were particularly alarmed by the scale and apparent organization of the event, which involved dozens of participants and suggested a level of coordination not typically associated with routine club runs or social functions. In the days following the Maitland incident, the situation appeared to escalate further with reports of violence connected to the events at the clubhouse. A vehicle was allegedly driven into the premises and deliberately set alight, resulting in a man being hospitalized under police guard. Whether directly connected or acting as a retaliatory response, the act underscored the heightened volatility of the situation and reinforced police assessments that the region was at risk of broader unrest. Faced with the clear potential for further violence and a network of associations that was proving resistant to conventional policing tactics, NSW police determined that a focused, intelligence-driven strike force was necessary. In August 2025, Strikeforce Benson was officially established under the auspices of the State Crime Command's Raptor Squad, a specialized unit tasked with tackling organized crime, including outlaw motorcycle gangs and supported by operational support groups and intelligence divisions. The mandate of Strikeforce Benson was concise but ambitious. Identify the underlying drivers of the instability, disrupt emerging criminal networks before they could consolidate, and prevent retaliatory violence before it spilled into public spaces. Rather than acting as a short-term response to a single incident, Strikeforce Benson was structured as a sustained operational effort. NSW Police made it clear that the force would employ a combination of traditional investigative techniques and newer legal tools, including public safety orders and consorting warnings to intervene early and legally disrupt potentially harmful activity. Public safety orders, which temporarily restrict individuals from attending specific locations or events considered high risk, were one of the first tools deployed. On 1 August 2025, police issued 27 such orders aimed at preventing key individuals from returning to the Hunter Region clubhouse following the Maitland incident. These orders were preventative measures intended to reduce the likelihood of further clashes. More than 30 consorting warnings were also issued in the months that followed. Under New South Wales law, consorting warnings formally notify individuals that they must not associate with specific people. Continued association after a warning is issued may itself become a criminal offense. Police view these warnings as an effective mechanism for legally separating criminal networks, particularly organized groups like outlaw motorcycle clubs. However, authorities allege that many warnings were ignored. Police reported detecting repeated breaches not only within New South Wales, but also during out-of-state travels, including national runs and the Hells Angels' own anniversary events in jurisdictions such as the ACT, Victoria, and South Australia. Taken together, these developments painted a picture of an intensifying conflict that was not contained by ordinary policing measures. This combination of unusual movement patterns, escalating confrontations, and repeated alleged consorting breaches formed the foundation for the emergence of Strikeforce Benson, an operation designed not just to respond to isolated incidents, but to prevent a cycle of violence that had the potential to affect communities across states. 12 members charged following ongoing police investigation. As Strikeforce Benson moved from intelligence gathering into active enforcement, investigators shifted their focus from monitoring behavior to testing compliance. Central to this phase of the operation was the strategic use of consorting warnings, a legal mechanism under New South Wales law designed to disrupt organized criminal networks without relying on traditional conspiracy or violence-based charges. Over several months, police issued more than 30 consorting warnings to individuals identified as members or close associates of the Hells Angels motorcycle club. Each warning was delivered formally, leaving no ambiguity about its intent or legal effect. Recipients were explicitly informed that continued association with certain named individuals, many of whom had prior convictions, could itself become a criminal offense. From a policing perspective, these warnings served both as a preventative measure and a compliance test. Investigators closely tracked behavior following the issuance of these notices. According to police, rather than reducing contact, several individuals continued to meet, travel, and appear together in circumstances that went beyond incidental or unavoidable contact. These interactions were allegedly observed at club-related gatherings, during interstate travel, and in public settings that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. What concerned investigators was not a single breach, but a pattern of repeated association. Each alleged breach was logged, cross-referenced with existing warnings, and assessed within the broader context of the investigation. Police sources indicated that the persistence of these associations suggested a deliberate disregard for the legal restrictions imposed, reinforcing suspicions that the network remained active and organized. By late 2025, Strikeforce Benson investigators concluded that the threshold for enforcement had been met. In December 2025, police moved decisively, transitioning from disruption to prosecution. 12 men, ranging in age from their 20s through to their 50s, were charged with habitually consorting with convicted offenders after warning an offense that reflects ongoing behavior rather than a single incident. The charges were laid following a detailed review of surveillance records, operational intelligence, and compliance checks. Authorities emphasized that habitually consorting charges require clear evidence of repeated association after formal warning, making them more complex than simple breach offenses. Police described the evidence as cumulative, built carefully over time rather than arising from a single operation or encounter. In addition to the consorting charges, investigators uncovered ancillary offenses during the course of the investigation. A small number of the accused faced further allegations, including failing to comply with digital evidence orders, driving while disqualified, and weapons-related matters. Police were careful to note that these additional charges were not the primary objective of the Strikeforce, but emerged as a result of lawful searches and compliance checks conducted during the investigation. Following their arrest and charging, all 12 men were granted conditional bail. Bail conditions varied depending on individual circumstances, but typically included restrictions on movement, association, and compliance with police directions. Authorities stressed that the granting of bail reflected standard judicial procedure and did not indicate any reduction in the seriousness of the allegations. Court appearances for the accused were scheduled across multiple local courts, spanning from December 2025 through February 2026. This staggered timeline reflected the number of individuals involved and the different jurisdictions in which charges were laid. Police confirmed that each matter would proceed independently through the legal system, with outcomes to be determined by the courts. From a law enforcement perspective, the charges marked a significant milestone in Strikeforce Benson. Rather than responding to overt violence, police had successfully advanced an investigation based on association, movement, and compliance areas, often difficult to prosecute but central to organized crime operations. Authorities described the enforcement action as a deliberate signal that consorting warnings were not symbolic gestures but enforceable legal tools. Continues to examine remaining associations and movements linked to the investigation. Police have indicated that further compliance checks, interviews, and potential enforcement actions remain on the table. Whether additional charges follow will depend on what the ongoing review uncovers. For now, the charging of 12 members and associates stands as one of the most visible outcomes of the investigation to date, a demonstration of how modern policing strategies target structure and coordination, rather than waiting for violence to borders occur. The Hunter region incident that drew police attention. The events that unfolded in the Hunter region in late July 2025 represented a sharp departure from the uneasy but largely managed balance that had existed between outlaw motorcycle clubs in the area for years. Maitland, a regional center with a long history of motorcycle club presence, had rarely been the stage for overt, large-scale confrontations involving interstate figures. That changed on 23 July 2025, when intelligence and witness accounts indicated an unusually large and coordinated gathering that immediately drew the attention of law enforcement. According to police assessments, the arrival of up to 50 Hells Angels members at the Gladiators' established clubhouse was not spontaneous. The timing, the numbers involved, and the composition of those attending suggested planning rather than coincidence. Vehicles linked to different chapters were reportedly observed entering the area within a short time frame, an indicator police often associate with organized intent rather than routine social activity. The Gladiators' clubhouse itself carried symbolic weight. As one of Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Gladiators had maintained a continuous presence in the region for decades. Their Maitland location was not just a meeting point, but a marker of long-standing territorial identity. Any challenge to that space, police believed, would be interpreted as a direct challenge to the club's status and autonomy. Witness accounts and local reporting described a tense confrontation inside and around the premises. It was alleged that visiting members delivered a stark ultimatum: accept a patchover to the Hells Angels or vacate the clubhouse entirely. Such demands, if substantiated, represented an escalation beyond customary rival posturing. Patchovers are significant events in outlaw motorcycle culture, effectively dissolving one club's identity into another. They are rarely achieved through open coercion, and police viewed the alleged ultimatum as a sign of aggressive expansion rather than negotiation. Those present reportedly described an atmosphere of intimidation. While details remain subject to ongoing investigation, claims of forced expulsions and verbal pressure added to the seriousness of the situation. Importantly, police noted that the confrontation did not result in immediate mass violence, but this absence did little to ease concerns. From an operational standpoint, situations that conclude without violence can still be considered high risk if the underlying tensions remain unresolved. In the days following the Maitland gathering, law enforcement agencies increased monitoring of the area. Intelligence assessments indicated that the confrontation had unsettled not only the clubs involved, but also the broader network of alliances and rivalries that shaped the regional bikie landscape. Police were particularly concerned about the potential for retaliation, either immediate or delayed, as clubs processed what had occurred. Those concerns intensified when a subsequent incident occurred at the same location. A vehicle was driven into the clubhouse and set alight, causing significant damage and resulting in one man being taken to hospital under police guard. While investigations into responsibility were ongoing, the act itself dramatically escalated the situation. From a policing perspective, arson linked to an already volatile dispute represented a serious threat, not only to those involved, but to nearby residents and the wider community. Authorities assessed the fire as a clear signal that the dispute had moved beyond intimidation into actions capable of causing serious harm. Even without confirmed attribution, the timing of the incident so soon after the confrontation reinforced fears that the region was entering a cycle of escalation. Police analysts noted that such incidents often act as catalysts, triggering further acts of retaliation if left unchecked. The Hunter region's geographic and social characteristics added to the concern. Maitland sits near major transport routes and residential areas, meaning any further confrontations risked unfolding in public view. Unlike isolated rural locations, incidents in this area carried a higher likelihood of involving bystanders, emergency services, and critical infrastructure. In response, senior police commanders re-evaluated the threat level associated with the region. What had initially been monitored as a developing situation was now classified as an emerging public safety risk. The combination of a large-scale confrontation, alleged coercion, and a serious act of property damage altered the calculus for law enforcement decision-makers. Police also considered the broader implications beyond Maitland. Intelligence suggested that the outcome of the incident would be closely watched by other clubs, both within New South Wales and interstate. Allowing an apparent attempt at forced territorial change to go unanswered could set a precedent, encouraging similar actions elsewhere. From a strategic standpoint, intervention was not only about resolving a local dispute, but about maintaining stability across the wider outlaw motorcycle club environment. The Hunter region incident therefore became a reference point in subsequent police briefings and operational planning. It illustrated how quickly a localized confrontation could evolve into a multi-layered threat involving violence, retaliation, and interstate implications. It also highlighted the limitations of passive monitoring when confronted with coordinated action. For investigators, the Maitland events underscored the need for a structured and sustained response rather than isolated enforcement actions. The situation required intelligence coordination, legal disruption tools, and visible enforcement capability. These factors collectively informed the decision to escalate the response and formalize a dedicated operation. Ultimately, the Hunter region incident did more than trigger immediate police attention. It reshaped how authorities understood the risks unfolding at the time. It demonstrated that traditional assumptions about boundaries and restraint no longer applied, and that proactive measures were necessary to prevent further deterioration. It was against this backdrop, a destabilized region, unresolved tensions, and clear indicators of escalation, that Strikeforce Benson was conceived. The events in Maitland did not simply precede the Strikeforce. They defined its urgency, scope, and purpose. Events at the Maitland Clubhouse explained. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, a clubhouse is never just a building. It functions as a headquarters, a meeting ground, a symbol of territorial legitimacy, and a visible marker of a club's standing within the wider bikie landscape. For police and club members alike, control over a clubhouse represents far more than access to a physical space. It reflects authority, cohesion, and the ability to defend identity. Any challenge to such a site therefore carries implications that extend well beyond those present at the time. The Maitland Clubhouse, occupied by the Gladiators, held particular significance. As one of Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle clubs, the Gladiators had established deep roots in the region over decades. Their continued occupation of the site signaled endurance and stability in a subculture where clubs often rise, fracture, or disappear under pressure. From a policing perspective, that longevity had helped maintain a fragile equilibrium, where influence was understood rather than constantly contested. Police assessments indicate that the events at Maitland were not driven by negotiation or diplomacy. Instead, authorities believed the presence of visiting members was intended to convey authority through scale and visibility. In outlaw motorcycle culture, numbers matter. A large, coordinated appearance sends a message without words that a club has reach, backing, and the capacity to mobilize quickly. Investigators believe this show of presence was designed to unsettle the existing order and signal an expectation of compliance rather than dialogue. This approach differed from how territorial disputes have historically unfolded. In many cases, shifts in influence occur gradually through alliances, defections, or negotiated outcomes behind closed doors. The Maitland incident, by contrast, was interpreted by police as a direct and overt challenge to established control, delivered in a way that left little room for compromise. Such tactics are considered risky, as they force an immediate response rather than allowing tensions to dissipate over time. What followed, however, ran counter to what authorities believe was intended. Rather than weakening the Gladiators' position, the challenge appears to have solidified it. Members who might otherwise have been divided or disengaged reportedly closed ranks, reinforcing internal unity in the face of external pressure. Police analysts note that attempts at coercion often produce this effect, particularly within long-established clubs that place a high value on loyalty and shared history. Crucially, the situation did not remain confined to the two clubs directly involved. Support soon emerged from other outlaw motorcycle clubs with their own standing in the Australian bikie hierarchy. The involvement of the Nomads and Lone Wolf MC was particularly significant. Both clubs are known for maintaining independence and for selectively choosing where they align. Their backing of the Gladiators sent a clear signal that the challenge to the Maitland Clubhouse was not viewed as legitimate within the broader subculture. From a law enforcement perspective, this development altered the dynamics of the situation. What might have remained a bilateral dispute now carried the potential to draw in additional clubs, increasing the complexity and risk of escalation. While the show of support helped repel the immediate incursion, it also raised the stakes. Police are acutely aware that alliances, once activated, can rapidly transform localized disputes into wider conflicts, if not carefully managed. The response at Maitland demonstrated the resilience of established networks within the outlaw motorcycle scene. Rather than capitulating, the Gladiators leveraged long-standing relationships and mutual respect built over years. Investigators observed that these alliances functioned as a counterbalance to attempts at forced change, reinforcing informal rules about how territory and identity are contested. For police, the incident offered a clear lesson in how quickly symbolic actions can generate broader consequences. A challenge framed as a display of dominance can provoke reactions that extend far beyond the original intent. Even when overt violence is avoided, the mobilization of multiple clubs creates an environment where misunderstandings, miscalculations, or isolated incidents can ignite wider unrest. The Maitland events also highlighted the limits of relying on historical stability as a predictor of future behavior. Clubs that had coexisted without major conflict for years were suddenly drawn into a situation that threatened to unravel that balance. Police analysts noted that the speed at which alliances formed underscored the volatility inherent in the subculture, particularly when long-standing norms are tested. In the aftermath, authorities increased monitoring of communications, movements, and gatherings linked to the clubs involved. The objective was not only to detect potential retaliation, but also to understand how narratives around the incident were spreading. In outlaw motorcycle culture, perception matters. How an event is interpreted internally can shape future actions as much as the event itself. The closure of the Maitland clubhouse, following subsequent police action, further emphasized the seriousness with which authorities viewed the situation. While the closure was a practical measure tied to broader investigations, it also removed a focal point around which tensions might otherwise have continued to build. From a policing standpoint, disrupting access to contested spaces can be an effective way to slow escalation and regain situational control. Ultimately, the Maitland Clubhouse incident illustrated the fragile nature of territorial stability within the bikie landscape. It showed that even well-established arrangements can be challenged suddenly, and that such challenges rarely remain contained. For law enforcement, the episode reinforced the need for rapid intervention and sustained oversight when symbolic sites are contested. The events did not merely justify police involvement, they reshaped operational thinking. Authorities recognized that waiting for violence to erupt would have been a reactive and potentially dangerous approach. Instead, the Maitland incident became a case study in why early intelligence-led action was necessary, a rationale that would underpin the ongoing work of Strikeforce Benson in the months that followed. Why public safety orders were put in place. Public safety orders are among the most immediate and flexible tools available to police when intelligence suggests that a situation may escalate into violence. Unlike long-term court orders or criminal charges, these measures are designed to act quickly, addressing risk in real time rather than after harm has occurred. On 1 August 2025, NSW Police exercised this authority by issuing 27 public safety orders in response to rapidly evolving conditions in the Hunter region. The decision to deploy these orders followed an internal risk assessment that identified a heightened likelihood of confrontation. Police were not responding to a single isolated incident, but to a developing environment where unresolved tensions, heightened emotions, and increased movement of key individuals created conditions for further escalation. From a policing standpoint, the priority shifted from observation to immediate risk mitigation. Public safety orders allow officers to temporarily restrict an individual from entering a specific location or attending certain events when their presence is assessed as posing a threat to public safety. The threshold for issuing such an order is not proof of criminal activity, but a reasonable belief that harm could occur if no action is taken. This makes them particularly useful in situations involving organized groups where intent may be inferred from patterns of behavior rather than explicit acts. In the Hunter region, police identified several locations as potential flashpoints, with the Maitland clubhouse and its surrounding areas at the center of concern. Intelligence suggested that continued access to these sites could facilitate further confrontations, either planned or spontaneous. By limiting who could legally enter the area, authorities aimed to reduce the likelihood of rival groups crossing paths during a volatile period. The issuance of 27 orders reflected the scale of the perceived risk. Rather than targeting a single individual or small group, police acted broadly to separate key figures whose presence could inflame tensions. Each order was time-limited and tailored to specific locations, underscoring their role as temporary controls rather than permanent restrictions. From an operational perspective, the orders served several functions simultaneously. First, they reduced the immediate risk of physical confrontation by physically separating individuals linked to the dispute. Second, they provided officers with a clear legal basis to intervene if conditions were breached, allowing for swift enforcement without the need for lengthy investigations at that stage. Third, they created a buffer period during which investigators could work without the added pressure of managing ongoing flare-ups. Police also viewed the orders as a stabilizing mechanism for the broader community. The Hunter region includes residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, and major transport routes. Any escalation near contested sites would not have been confined to those directly involved. By restricting access early, authorities sought to reassure the public and prevent incidents that could spill into everyday spaces. Importantly, senior police emphasized that public safety orders are preventative, not punitive. They do not imply guilt, nor do they result in a criminal record simply by being issued. Their purpose is to manage risk, not to punish behavior after the fact. This distinction was central to how the orders were framed internally and publicly, particularly in a high-profile situation involving organized groups. The timing of the orders was also deliberate. Issued shortly after the initial events, they aimed to disrupt momentum. In conflict situations, momentum can be as dangerous as intent. Gatherings that follow a confrontation often serve as catalysts for retaliation, even if no explicit plan exists. Police analysts note that removing the opportunity for such gatherings can be enough to prevent escalation. Another key consideration was investigative integrity. Strikeforce Benson was still in its early stages, with intelligence collection ongoing. Unchecked movement and association near critical locations could compromise surveillance efforts or lead to evidence being lost amid disorder. By controlling access, police created a more predictable environment in which to conduct their work. The orders also functioned as a signal. While not a punishment, they communicated that authorities were actively managing the situation and would not tolerate actions that endangered public safety. This signaling effect can influence behavior, encouraging restraint among those who might otherwise test boundaries. Compliance with the orders was closely monitored. Breaches could result in enforcement action, giving police an additional mechanism to intervene if individuals attempted to re-enter restricted areas. This compliance monitoring fed into broader assessments of behavior and risk, informing subsequent decisions under the ongoing investigation. In the immediate aftermath, police reported that the orders contributed to a noticeable reduction in activity around the identified locations. The absence of large gatherings or confrontations suggested that the measures had achieved their primary objective: buying time. Time for tensions to cool, time for investigators to assess the situation more fully, and time to plan longer-term responses. From a strategic standpoint, the use of public safety orders illustrated a shift toward proactive policing. Rather than waiting for violence to occur and then responding, authorities acted on early warning signs. This approach reflects lessons learned from past incidents, where delays in intervention allowed disputes to escalate beyond easy control. While temporary by design, the impact of the orders extended beyond their duration. They set the tone for subsequent enforcement actions and reinforced the framework within which Strikeforce Benson would operate. By prioritizing prevention and stability, police established a foundation for the investigative and legal measures that followed. In summary, the public safety orders issued on 1 August 2025 were a calculated response to a rapidly evolving risk environment. They were deployed to separate individuals, protect the community, and support ongoing investigations. Authorities have consistently maintained that without these early interventions, the potential for further escalation would have been significantly higher, making the orders a key factor in stabilizing the situation during a critical period. How consorting warnings are used by police. Consorting warnings occupy a distinctive place in modern policing because they target relationships rather than isolated acts. Unlike traditional criminal charges, which require proof of a specific offense, consorting provisions focus on association patterns that indicate coordination, influence, or collective intent. Police rely on these warnings as an early-stage intervention tool, particularly when dealing with organized groups whose activities may not yet meet the threshold for more serious charges. In New South Wales, consorting laws allow police to formally notify an individual that they must not associate with certain named persons. These named individuals are typically people with prior criminal convictions or those assessed as posing a heightened risk within an organized network. Once a warning is issued, any further association with the prohibited person can, if repeated, constitute the offense of habitual consorting. The power of the warning lies in its clarity. Recipients are made fully aware of the legal consequences of continued contact. From a strategic standpoint, consorting warnings are designed to disrupt structure rather than respond to outcomes. Organized groups often rely on repeated face-to-face contact to coordinate activities, reinforce hierarchy, and maintain cohesion. By legally restricting who can associate with whom, police aim to weaken those connections and introduce friction into the network. Even when no immediate criminal conduct is evident, disrupting association can limit a group's capacity to plan or respond collectively. Under Strikeforce Benson, investigators made extensive use of this tool. More than 30 consorting warnings were issued to individuals identified through intelligence analysis as playing roles within or alongside the Hells Angels network. Each warning was served in accordance with legal requirements, ensuring recipients understood exactly which associations were prohibited and under what circumstances enforcement could occur. The issuance of a warning also marked the beginning of a monitoring phase. Police do not assume non-compliance. Instead, they observe behavior following the warning to assess whether individuals adjust their conduct. Compliance may indicate de-escalation or a willingness to distance from risky associations. Non-compliance, by contrast, can signal ongoing coordination or deliberate defiance. Investigators allege that, in this case, compliance was limited. Surveillance and intelligence gathering suggested that some individuals continued to meet, travel, and appear together in ways inconsistent with incidental contact. Police differentiate between unavoidable encounters, such as passing someone in a public place, and deliberate association, which may include coordinated travel, attendance at events, or repeated meetings at known locations. Each alleged breach was treated as a data point rather than a standalone incident. Officers documented times, locations, and participants, cross-referencing this information with existing warnings. Over time, patterns emerged. Repeated associations involving the same individuals suggested persistence rather than oversight, strengthening the argument that the warnings were being ignored. From an evidentiary perspective, consorting offenses are cumulative. A single breach may not meet the threshold for prosecution, but repeated breaches after warning can demonstrate habitual behavior. This requirement places a premium on careful documentation and patience. Police must show not only that associations occurred, but that they occurred after clear warnings were issued and understood. The use of consorting warnings also serves a diagnostic function. By observing who continues to associate despite restrictions, investigators gain insight into which relationships are most resilient and which individuals may hold influence within the network. Those who repeatedly appear at the center of breaches often attract closer scrutiny, as their actions can reveal informal leadership or coordination roles. Importantly, consorting warnings are not limited by geography. Associations that occur interstate can still be relevant if they involve individuals subject to warnings. Under Strikeforce Benson, investigators tracked movements across jurisdictions, allowing them to assess whether restrictions were being respected beyond local boundaries. This broader lens helped police understand the scope of coordination and whether associations were being deliberately maintained despite increased scrutiny. Critics of consorting laws sometimes argue that they risk overreach by criminalizing association rather than conduct. Police counter that the warnings themselves are preventative and transparent, offering individuals a clear choice. The objective is not to punish lawful social contact, but to interrupt patterns that have historically preceded organized criminal activity. In operational terms, consorting warnings also provide flexibility. They allow police to act without immediately resorting to high-profile arrests or charges that could inflame tensions. By contrast, warnings operate quietly, setting legal boundaries while giving individuals the opportunity to modify their behavior. When those boundaries are repeatedly crossed, enforcement action becomes both justified and proportionate. Within Strikeforce Benson, alleged breaches of consorting warnings became a central pillar of the case against those eventually charged. Each documented association added weight to the overall evidentiary picture, shifting the investigation from risk management to enforcement. Police described this progression as deliberate. Warnings first, observation second, prosecution only when necessary. Beyond individual cases, the broader impact of consorting warnings lies in their signaling effect. They communicate that police are actively monitoring networks and are prepared to use legal tools to disrupt coordination. This awareness alone can alter behavior within groups, prompting some members to distance themselves from high-risk associations. As the investigation continues, consorting warnings remain a key component of police strategy. They offer a way to manage risk, gather intelligence, and intervene early, all without waiting for violence or more serious crimes to occur. In that sense, their use under Strikeforce Benson reflects a wider shift toward proactive policing, where preventing escalation is valued as highly as responding to it. activity detected across multiple Australian states. As Strikeforce Benson progressed, investigators began to recognize that the activity under scrutiny was not confined to a single region or jurisdiction. What initially appeared to be a localized issue in the Hunter region gradually revealed a broader footprint, extending across multiple Australian states and territories. This shift in understanding marked a significant turning point in the investigation, prompting police to reassess both the scale of the activity and the resources required to address it. Intelligence gathered in the months following the Maitland incident pointed to interstate travel by individuals already known to police. These movements were not random. Investigators observed that travel often coincided with major club-related events, including national runs, commemorative gatherings, and milestone anniversaries. Such events, while outwardly social, are closely monitored by law enforcement because they provide opportunities for coordination, reinforcement of hierarchy, and the exchange of information across chapters. Reports of alleged consorting breaches began to surface in the Australian Capital Territory, Victoria, and South Australia. These detections were significant not only because they crossed jurisdictional boundaries, but because they involved individuals who were already subject to legal restrictions. Police analysts noted that the timing and destinations of the trips suggested planning rather than coincidence, raising questions about the purpose and level of organization involved. Interstate movements pose unique challenges for law enforcement. Each jurisdiction operates under its own legal framework, policing priorities, and intelligence systems. For Strikeforce Benson, this meant expanding cooperation beyond NSW police to include interstate counterparts. Information sharing became essential, allowing authorities to piece together a more complete picture of movements, associations, and potential breaches. Investigators began compiling detailed timelines of travel, noting when individuals left New South Wales, where they went, and who they were observed with upon arrival. This process involved cross-referencing vehicle movements, accommodation records, event schedules, and open-source intelligence. The aim was not simply to document travel, but to understand how these movements fit into a wider pattern of coordination. What emerged was a network that appeared capable of mobilizing across state lines with relative ease. From a policing perspective, this capability is a hallmark of organized activity. Groups that can coordinate travel, align schedules, and maintain contact across jurisdictions demonstrate a level of structure that goes beyond casual association. National runs and anniversary events attracted particular attention. These gatherings often bring together members from different chapters, providing opportunities to reinforce loyalty and share strategic direction. While attendance at such events is not inherently unlawful, police view them as high-value intelligence opportunities, especially when attendees are subject to legal warnings or restrictions. The detection of alleged breaches during these events reinforced concerns that legal boundaries were being tested. Investigators noted that continued association in interstate settings suggested an intention to maintain connections despite increased scrutiny. This behavior, police argue, is relevant when assessing whether networks are adapting to enforcement pressure or attempting to operate as usual. As the scope of the investigation widened, Strikeforce Benson evolved from a regionally focused operation into one with national implications. NSW police worked closely with agencies in other states and territories, aligning intelligence efforts and ensuring that observations made in one jurisdiction informed assessments in another. This collaborative approach allowed police to track activity more effectively and avoid gaps that could be exploited. The expansion also influenced how investigators prioritized resources. Rather than concentrating solely on fixed locations, police began to focus more heavily on movement and association. Travel itself became a data point, offering insight into which individuals were central to coordination and which events served as hubs for interaction. Authorities were careful to stress that the detection of interstate activity did not automatically imply criminal conduct. However, in the context of an ongoing investigation, repeated movement linked to known associates was viewed as relevant to understanding risk. Police emphasized that their interest lay in patterns rather than isolated trips. From a strategic standpoint, the interstate dimension underscored the limitations of addressing organized activity through localized responses alone. A disruption in one region could be offset by activity elsewhere if networks remained intact. Recognizing this, Strikeforce Benson adjusted its approach to account for the fluid nature of movement within the outlaw motorcycle club environment. The broader reach of the investigation also carried symbolic weight. By demonstrating an ability to monitor and respond to activity across state borders, police aimed to counter any perception that jurisdictional boundaries could be used to evade scrutiny. This message was directed not only at those under investigation, but at the wider network observing how authorities responded. Ultimately, the detection of activity across multiple states reinforced the rationale for Strikeforce Benson. It confirmed that the issues confronting police were not isolated or transient, but part of a larger pattern of coordination. This realization informed subsequent enforcement actions and shaped the ongoing direction of the investigation. December police operations across Sydney. The coordinated police activity carried out across Sydney in mid-December represented the most visible enforcement phase of Strikeforce Benson to date. Unlike earlier stages of the investigation, which relied heavily on surveillance, intelligence analysis, and legal warnings, the December operations marked a deliberate shift toward direct action. Police timing was calculated, coming after months of evidence accumulation and cross-checking designed to ensure arrests would withstand judicial scrutiny. In the early hours of 10 and 11 December 2025, officers from the NSW Police Raptor Squad, supported by specialist tactical units and operational support groups, moved simultaneously on multiple locations across metropolitan Sydney. Approximately 14 warrants were executed, spanning suburbs in the west, southwest, and outer metropolitan areas. Each location had been selected based on intelligence linking individuals to alleged breaches detected earlier in the investigation. Police emphasized that the operation was highly coordinated but deliberately low-key. There were no public roadblocks, large-scale perimeter closures, or overt displays of force beyond what was operationally required. This approach reflected the nature of the investigation itself, focused on enforcement of existing legal mechanisms rather than disruption for its own sake. 11 men were taken into custody during the initial raids. A 12th individual was charged shortly afterward, following further investigative steps. Authorities noted that each arrest took place at a separate address, reinforcing the assessment that the network under scrutiny was geographically dispersed rather than centralized. From a policing perspective, this dispersion is significant, as it complicates surveillance and requires a broader operational footprint to manage effectively. Officers executed the warrants with a dual purpose. The first was enforcement, bringing individuals before the court in relation to alleged breaches identified during the investigation. The second was evidence consolidation. During the searches, police seized items relevant to association, communication, and movement, which could be examined to corroborate timelines and interactions already documented through intelligence work. Police sources described the operation as intelligence-led, meaning arrests were the culmination of prior investigative steps rather than the starting point. By December, Strikeforce Benson had already compiled detailed profiles of individuals' movements, associations, and compliance or lack thereof with legal restrictions. The warrants were executed only after investigators were satisfied that thresholds for action had been met. Importantly, authorities avoided framing the operation as a crackdown designed to send a public message. Instead, they characterized it as a procedural step within a longer investigation. This distinction matters in the context of organized crime policing, where premature or overly visible actions can sometimes disrupt intelligence flows or alert networks to investigative techniques. The staggered timing across 2 days was also intentional. Executing warrants in phases allows police to manage resources, reduce operational risk, and adapt quickly if unexpected developments arise. It also limits the ability of associates at one location to warn others elsewhere, preserving the element of control throughout the operation. Those arrested were transported to various police stations for processing. Charges were laid in relation to alleged offenses identified through the investigation, and all individuals were later dealt with through the court system rather than being held as part of a broader sweep. Police reiterated that the arrests were case-specific, based on individual conduct rather than group membership alone. From an operational standpoint, the December raids demonstrated the transition of Strikeforce Benson from monitoring to enforcement. Up until that point, much of the work had taken place behind the scenes with limited public visibility. The arrests brought that phase to a close while opening another, focused on court proceedings and continued compliance monitoring. Authorities were careful to stress that the operation did not signal the end of the investigation. On the contrary, police indicated that material seized during the raids would be analyzed to inform next steps. In complex investigations, enforcement actions often generate new intelligence, revealing additional associations or confirming patterns already suspected. The Sydney operations also underscored the role of the Raptor squad as a specialized unit tasked with addressing organized criminal activity through targeted intervention. By deploying the squad alongside specialist support, NSW police reinforced the seriousness with which the matter was being treated, without resorting to overt spectacle. In the broader context of Strikeforce Benson, the December raids served as a controlled assertion of authority. They demonstrated that warnings and restrictions were backed by enforcement capability, and that investigations extending over months would ultimately translate into concrete legal action when thresholds were crossed. As the matter proceeds through the courts, police maintain that the December operations were not an endpoint, but a necessary phase in a longer process aimed at sustained disruption and long-term stability rather than short-term impact. Items seized and what investigators are examining. The seizure of club-related items during the Strikeforce Benson operations was not incidental. In investigations involving outlaw motorcycle clubs, material objects often carry evidentiary value far beyond their surface appearance. What may look symbolic or decorative to an outsider can, to investigators, function as a map of relationships, status, and operational alignment within a broader network. Among the items taken during the December warrants were Hells Angels vests, patches, badges, jewelry, and several motorcycles. Police sources have indicated that each category of seized property is being assessed separately, using specialist knowledge of outlaw motorcycle club structures and customs. These items are now being catalogued, photographed, and compared against existing intelligence databases maintained by organized crime units. Vests and patches are of particular interest. In outlaw motorcycle culture, patches are not merely identifiers, but indicators of rank, chapter affiliation, and standing within the organization. Variations in stitching, placement, and design can reflect specific charters or roles. Investigators examine whether seized patches correspond to known chapters, whether they show signs of recent modification, and whether they align with movements detected during the investigation period. Badges and jewelry are also being scrutinized for similar reasons. Certain items are worn to signify achievements, loyalty, or participation in sanctioned activities. Police analysts look for consistency between what individuals claim about their status and what the material evidence suggests. Discrepancies can raise questions about authority, internal discipline, or the nature of an individual's association with others under investigation. Motorcycles seized during the operation are being treated as both physical assets and data sources. Vehicles can reveal travel patterns, mechanical modifications, and ownership histories that support or contradict timelines already established by investigators. Registration details, storage locations, and usage frequency are cross-referenced with surveillance records and documented encounters. Beyond the individual value of each item, investigators are particularly interested in how seized materials connect different people and locations. Identical or closely matched items recovered from separate addresses can indicate shared supply chains, coordinated distribution, or centralized control. These connections help police assess whether chapters are operating independently or under unified direction. The examination process also involves digital and forensic support. Some items, particularly jewelry and accessories, may contain engravings, serial numbers, or unique identifiers that can be traced back to specific events or individuals. Even wear patterns and repairs can offer insights into how long an item has been in use and whether it has changed hands. Importantly, police stress that the seizure of paraphernalia is not about symbolism alone. While such items may be protected forms of expression in other contexts, within an organized crime investigation, they can serve as corroborative evidence. When combined with surveillance data, communication records, and observed associations, physical objects help build a clearer, more comprehensive picture of coordination. Investigators are also using the seized items to refine their understanding of internal hierarchies. The presence or absence of certain insignia can suggest leadership roles or influence within a chapter. This information is valuable not only for current proceedings, but for future risk assessments and monitoring strategies. All seized property remains subject to legal processes, including forensic analysis and evidentiary review, before any determination is made about its admissibility in court or potential forfeiture. Police are careful to emphasize that examination does not automatically imply wrongdoing associated with each item, but rather reflects their relevance to the broader investigation. Within Strikeforce Benson, the analysis of seized materials is seen as a bridge between intelligence gathering and enforcement. It allows investigators to validate earlier assessments, identify gaps in their understanding, and determine whether further inquiries are warranted. In complex investigations, such material evidence often becomes more significant over time as patterns emerge. As authorities continue to assess the seized items, they remain focused on how physical evidence complements the narrative built through months of investigative work. Together, these elements form the foundation for decisions about future action, ensuring that any next steps are informed, proportionate, and grounded in documented fact.